You can buy a private island in Belize right now for $650,000. It sounds like a fortune, and compared to a studio apartment in San Francisco, it almost is not. But the purchase price is not the expensive part. The annual cost to operate that same island, staff, insurance, dock maintenance, water, power, transport, runs between $84,000 and $310,000 every year, whether you visit or not. The island you thought cost $650,000 will cost you $2 million over the first decade before you set foot on it twice. Today we are running the full economics. The comparison we are running is buying versus the alternatives. Because the private island market is one of the most opaque asset classes in existence, and most buyers enter it with the purchase price in mind and discover the operating economics only after closing. Private islands for sale today range from approximately $50,000 for a small, undeveloped rocky outcrop in Scandinavia to over $200 million for a developed resort island in the Pacific or Caribbean. The median asking price for a minimally developed Caribbean island suitable for private use sits between $1 million and $5 million in 2026. A realistic entry-level developed property with a basic structure, dock, and utility system costs approximately $1.5 million to $3 million. We are running 3 scenarios. An entry-level developed island at $2 million in the Caribbean, a mid-tier developed island at $8 million, with a full residence and guest structures, and the alternative, renting equivalent access through private island rental programs, a growing and increasingly sophisticated market. By the end, we will know what each path costs per day of actual use, what the exit economics look like, and what hidden costs the listing price never mentions. A 2-acre developed island in Belize, the Bahamas, or the Turks and Caicos. A basic 2-bedroom structure, a wooden dock, a rainwater cistern, a solar power array, and a small boat mooring. Asking price, $2 million. Acquisition costs beyond the purchase price. Closing costs on international island purchases typically run 5 to 8%. In the Bahamas, stamp duty alone is 10% on properties above $100,000. Using a mid-estimate of 7.5%, closing costs run approximately $150,000. Total day one outlay, $2,150,000. Annual operating costs, the entry-level island. Property tax in a mid-Caribbean location, approximately $15,000 per year. Insurance. A $2 million property in a hurricane zone costs approximately 2% to 4% of insured value annually. At 3%, $60,000 per year. This is the line item that shocks most buyers. Insurance alone on a Caribbean island runs $60,000 per year before any other expense. Part-time caretaker, visiting weekly to handle maintenance, security, and weather monitoring. $30,000 per year. Maintenance and repairs. Salt water, humidity, storms, and vegetation are relentless. Exterior repainting every 2 to 3 years. Dock inspection and repair. System servicing, pest control. Approximately $40,000 per year. Boat and transport. Annual maintenance, fuel, registration. Approximately $20,000. Utilities. Power system maintenance, water filtration, satellite internet, approximately $12,000. Total annual operating cost for the entry-level island, approximately $177,000. Over 10 years of ownership, $1,770,000 in operating costs, on top of $2,150,000 in acquisition. Total decade cost, $3,920,000. For a property you can realistically access 4 to 8 weeks per year. Cost per day of actual use at 6 weeks, 42 days, per year, $4,214 per day, before any mortgage payment. But here is where the numbers become genuinely uncomfortable. The infrastructure gap. Because that $2 million island assumes the infrastructure is already there. Most islands at that price range are not fully built out, and island construction costs are not what buyers expect. The rule of thumb in island development is the 1.5x to 3x multiplier. Whatever construction costs on the mainland, multiply it by 1.5 to 3 when the site has no road access. Every bag of cement, every appliance, every length of pipe must be transported by barge. Labor must be transported and housed during projects. Weather causes frequent delays. Specialized marine construction, docks, seawalls, underwater foundations, is inherently more expensive than equivalent land construction. A 2,000 square foot home that costs $300,000 to build on a comparable mainland tropical lot costs $450,000 to $900,000 on an island. A dock that costs $80,000 on a mainland lakefront costs $150,000 to $250,000 on a remote island. The implication: entry-level island listings at $500,000 to $1 million showing undeveloped land are not entry-level in any meaningful sense. A buyer who purchases a raw 3-acre island in the Bahamas for $750,000 then builds a 1,500 square foot structure, dock, solar system, and cistern will spend $900,000 to $1 million in construction, bringing total investment to $1,650,000 to $2,250,000 before annual operating costs start. There is also a permitting layer. Most Caribbean jurisdictions require environmental impact assessments for new construction on undeveloped island land. These cost $20,000 to $60,000 and take 6 to 18 months to complete. Building permits, coastal development licenses, and water access rights add another $30,000 to $100,000 in fees and require local legal representation throughout the process. Now the mid-tier island. 5 to 10 acres, developed with a main residence, guest cottages, a permanent dock, solar power, satellite communications, a boat fleet, and a year-round caretaker team. Asking price, $8 million. Acquisition costs at 7.5%, $600,000. Total day one outlay, $8,600,000. Annual operating costs, the mid-tier island. Property tax at a low-tax Caribbean jurisdiction, $50,000 per year. In higher tax jurisdictions like Florida or British Columbia, up to $120,000. Insurance at 2.5% of insured value, $200,000 per year. Full-time caretaker and ground staff, 2 to 3 year-round employees with accommodation, $120,000 annually. Maintenance and repairs at this development scale, $100,000 per year. Boat fleet maintenance, fuel, and crew, $60,000 annually. Utilities and systems, $30,000 per year. Total annual operating cost for the mid-tier island, approximately $560,000. Over 10 years, $5,600,000 in acquisition. Total decade cost, $14,200,000. For a property occupied perhaps 8 to 12 weeks per year. Cost per day of actual use at 10 weeks, 70 days, $8,000 per day, before financing. Now here is the alternative math. What it costs to access the same experience without owning it. Because the private island rental market is more developed than most people realize, and the comparison is not what you expect. The private island rental market is real and growing. Platforms like Private Islands Inc. and Airbnb Lux list fully staffed, maintained private islands across the Caribbean, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. A well-developed Caribbean island with a 4-bedroom main house, guest accommodation, a dock, a boat, An on-call staff rents for approximately $15,000 to $35,000 per week in high season. We will use $22,000 per week as a mid-market rate. If you spend 6 weeks per year at $22,000 per week, $132,000 annually. No property tax, no insurance, no caretaker salary, no maintenance, no boat costs, no capital projects. Compare that to the entry-level owner, $177,000 per year in operating costs, with ongoing infrastructure exposure on top. The renter spends $132,000 for 6 weeks. The owner spends $177,000 to maintain the ability to visit for 6 weeks and cannot easily use it for more. For the mid-tier owner at $560,000 per year, 10 weeks of rental at $35,000 per week, a rate equivalent to a staffed $8 million property, costs $350,000. The owner spends $210,000 more annually to own rather than access. The math flips only if 3 conditions are met. The owner visits significantly more than 6 to 10 weeks per year. The island appreciates enough that exit proceeds compensate for operating costs, or the island generates rental income during unoccupied weeks. A separate business operation with its own economics. Do private islands appreciate? Inconsistently, with a wide distribution of outcomes. The market is illiquid in ways residential real estate is not. There is no MLS equivalent, no traditional comps. Marketing a private island to qualified buyers typically takes 12 to 36 months and requires specialized brokers charging 5 to 10% of the sale price, significantly higher than residential commissions, because the transaction is complex, international, and multi-jurisdictional. Caribbean and Pacific Islands did appreciate meaningfully between 2015 and 2022. Some islands sold in 2019, resold in 2022, at 40% to 60% premiums. Since 2023, the market has normalized. High interest rates reduced the qualified buyer pool. Climate risk increased insurance costs. Some Caribbean markets have softened. The realistic exit scenario for an entry-level $2 million island, after 10 years of $177,000 annual costs, but $1,770,000 total, the property sells for $2,400,000. A 20% appreciation, net of $200,000 in brokerage fees. Net exit proceeds, $2,200,000. Total decade cost after exit, $3,920,000 invested, minus $2,200,000 recovered, equals $1,720,000 net cost for 420 days of use, $4,095 per day. The rental equivalent for 420 days over 10 years, $1,320,000. $3,143 per day, with no exit risk, no infrastructure liability, and full flexibility to change locations each year. But here is the scenario where owning genuinely wins the math, and it is not the scenario most buyers are planning for when they fall in love with an island listing. The economic case for island ownership strengthens under 3 specific conditions. Condition 1. Substantial rental income. An island rented for 30 to 40 weeks per year at $20,000 to $35,000 per week generates $600,000 to $1,400,000 in gross annual revenue. After operating costs of $250,000, net operating income of $450,000 per year at a 6% capitalization rate implies an asset value of $7,500,000. The island becomes a hospitality business. The ownership economics transform entirely. Condition 2. High personal use. The per-day cost of ownership declines as use increases. An owner who occupies the island for 20 weeks, 140 days, Per year changes the cost per day from $4,214 to $1,264 on operating costs alone. At 30 weeks per year, ownership becomes genuinely competitive with luxury resort alternatives in equivalent locations. Condition 3. Low tax jurisdiction. Belize, the Bahamas, Fiji, Vanuatu, and certain Greek island jurisdictions offer property tax structures that dramatically reduce annual carrying costs. An island paying $5,000 per year in property tax versus $50,000 saves $450,000 over a decade. Jurisdiction selection is one of the highest leverage decisions in island ownership economics. Here is the complete picture. A $2 million entry-level Caribbean island costs $3,920,000 over a decade, including acquisition and annual operating expenses. Per day of typical use at 6 weeks per year, $4,095. The rental alternative for equivalent access, $3,143 per day for 10 years. No infrastructure liability, no weather risk, full flexibility. Ownership costs more per day, carries all the downside, and involves an illiquid, expensive-to-exit asset in a market that does not reliably appreciate. The $8 million mid-tier island costs over $14 million to own for a decade. The rental equivalent for the same use frequency, $3,500,000. The ownership premium, $10,700,000 absorbed by the privilege of ownership versus access. The math flips when rental income is substantial, personal use is high, and the tax jurisdiction minimizes carry. Those conditions are achievable. They are just not the default outcome for a buyer who acquires an island as a pure luxury asset and visits 6 weeks per year. The most honest framing: a private island is not a real estate investment in the traditional sense. It is a lifestyle asset with a very high, very illiquid carrying cost. The buyers who are happy know the number going in. The ones who are not discovered, the $177,000 annual operating cost after the wire cleared.